Captain Dane Carver watched 17 dreadnoughts light up his sensor array like a Christmas tree made of imminent death. The bridge alarm screamed. His coffee mug slid across the console. He caught it mid-slide, took a sip, and set it back down with the kind of deliberate calm that made his XO sweat through her uniform. "They're firing," Lieutenant Rhea Okoye said, voice tight. "I can see that," Dane replied. The question wasn't whether the volley would hit. The question was whether he'd bother to dodge. The Nightjar was smaller than most civilian freighters. She looked like a chunk of asteroid that had accidentally developed engines. No visible weapon ports, no running lights. Her hull was matte black composite layered with adaptive plating that swallowed radar, lidar, and anything else anyone felt like throwing at her. Dane had flown her for 6 years, and in that time exactly 3 people had seen her coming. 2 of them were dead. The third was his mother, and she didn't count because she'd helped design the damn thing. Right now, the Nightjar hung in the outer belt of the Talos system, 3 AU from the nearest habitable moon. The 17 dreadnoughts belonged to the Krev Dominion, a species that prized symmetry, overwhelming force, and making sure everyone knew they were in charge. Their formation was textbook, 3-tier wedge, overlapping fire arcs, enough tonnage to flatten a small moon. Dane had read the manuals. He'd also read the autopsy reports from the colonies the Krev had leveled. They'd sent a formal demand 2 hours ago: surrender the Nightjar and her crew or be eradicated. Dane had replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Rhea had suggested he take it more seriously. Dane had suggested she trust the plan. "Distance to lead dreadnought?" Dane asked. 60,000 clicks in closing, Rhea said. "They're in weapons range. We are very much not." "Perfect." The volley came in a beautiful, synchronized wave. Plasma lances, kinetic slugs, and something that looked like angry ball lightning stitched across the black. The Nightjar's computer projected impact vectors in cheerful red. Dane leaned back in his chair and scratched his jaw. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. It itched. "Sir," Rhea said. "Yep." "They're about to." "Yep." The first slug punched through where the Nightjar had been 2 seconds ago. Dane had tapped the helm controls with his thumb, a lazy drift that looked accidental. The plasma lances converged on empty space. The ball lightning dissipated into the asteroid belt, vaporizing a chunk of nickel iron that had been minding its own business. Rhea exhaled. "You could warn me before you do that. Where's the fun?" Dane pulled up the tactical overlay. The Krev formation tightened. They were regrouping, recalculating. Somewhere on the lead dreadnought, a targeting officer was probably having a very bad day. Dane felt a flicker of sympathy. Then he remembered the colony on Hadar IV and stopped feeling sympathetic. "They're preparing a second volley," Rhea said. "Wider dispersal. They're not going to miss this time." "They will, though. How can you possibly?" Dane tapped a key. The Nightjar shivered. Her adaptive plating shifted, angles realigning to scatter incoming sensor pings into the noise of the asteroid field. Her engines dropped to station-keeping burn, a whisper of thrust barely distinguishable from background radiation. On the Krev sensors, the Nightjar would look like a mirage, a ghost ship that had never been there at all. "Silent mode engaged," Dane said. Rhea stared at the console. "We just disappeared, more or less. They're going to keep firing. Let them." The second volley was twice as large. The Krev had decided overkill was the appropriate response. Dane watched the tracking data with mild interest. The plasma lances carved through the asteroid belt, superheating rock into glowing slag. The kinetic slugs punched craters into anything solid. The ball lightning did its angry ball lightning thing. None of it came within 10,000 clicks of the Nightjar. "They can't see us," Rhea whispered. "Correct. They have no idea where we are." "Also correct. So what do we do now?" Dane finished his coffee. It was cold. He set the mug down and cracked his knuckles. "Now," he said, "we go say hello." The Nightjar slipped through the Krev formation like a rumor. Dane kept the engines at minimum burn, using gravity wells and momentum to drift between dreadnoughts. Rhea had stopped asking questions. She just watched the proximity sensors and tried not to hyperventilate. The Krev ships were massive. The smallest was 300 meters stem to stern, bristling with turrets and missile racks. The largest was closer to a kilometer, a mobile fortress shaped like a serrated blade. Its name translated roughly to inevitable consequence, which Dane found both pretentious and accurate. He made a note to blow it up first. "Distance to flagship?" Dane asked. 12,000 clicks. They're scanning the belt, active sweeps every 30 seconds. Any hits, negative, we're cold as the void. Good, keep it that way. Dane pulled up the weapons manifest. The Nightjar carried exactly one offensive system, a Mark VII thermonuclear warhead nestled in a custom delivery pod. It was old tech, the kind of thing people had stopped using after plasma lances became standard. Dane liked old tech. Old tech was reliable. Old tech didn't need a quantum core or a prayer to work. You armed it, you launched it, and if you did everything right, something very large stopped existing. The delivery pod was another story. Dane's mother had designed it during her tenure at ONI, back when humanity was still figuring out how to fight wars in 3 dimensions. It was a stealth package wrapped around a guidance system wrapped around a warhead. On paper, it could slip through any defense grid ever deployed. In practice, it had been used exactly once during the series incident and the details were still classified. Dane had access to those files. He'd read them twice. They were creative. We're coming up on the flagship's stern, Rhea said. Their shield emitters are concentrated forward, rear quarters exposed. Typical. Should we launch now? Not yet, sir. If we get any closer, trust me. The Nightjar drifted into the flagship's sensor shadow, a blind spot where overlapping arrays created a pocket of null space. Dane had calculated the drift 3 days ago, accounting for stellar wind, gravitational perturbations, and the flagship's projected course. The math had taken 6 hours. The execution took 90 seconds. Rhea's knuckles were white on the armrest. Now, Dane said. He tapped the console. The delivery pod ejected from the Nightjar's ventral bay, a tiny black cylinder no larger than a trash can. It tumbled for exactly 2 seconds, oriented, and fired a cold gas thruster. The thrust was so minimal it barely registered on inertial sensors. The pod drifted toward the flagship's hull, riding the gravitational gradient like a surfer on a very slow, very deadly wave. Pod is away, Rhea said. Impact in 90 seconds. Good, bring us about. I want distance. How much distance? Enough to not be here when that thing goes off. Rhea's hands flew across the helm. The Nightjar rotated on axis, her engines still cold, using reaction wheels to pivot. She began a slow drift back through the formation, retracing her path. Dane watched the timer, 80 seconds, 70, somewhere on the flagship. A sensor tech was about to have a very confusing day. Sir, Rhea said, voice tight, they're launching fighters. Dane glanced at the tactical display. 6 squadrons of Krev interceptors were peeling off from the Dreadnoughts, fanning out into the asteroid belt. They were fast, maneuverable, and equipped with active sensors that could punch through most stealth fields. The Nightjar's adaptive plating was good, but it wasn't invisible. If one of those fighters got close enough, they'd register the Nightjar as a ghost contact. If 2 of them got close enough, they'd triangulate. If 3 got close enough, Dane would have to start caring. 50 seconds, Rhea said. I see them. They're moving into a search grid. If they sweep this sector, they won't. How do you? The delivery pod touched the flagship's hull. Magnetic clamps engaged. A cutting laser bored through 15 centimeters of composite armor in 3 seconds, creating a hole just wide enough for the warhead. The pod retracted the laser, armed the warhead, and set the timer for 10 seconds. Then it did the polite thing and self-destructed, vaporizing itself into a fine mist of molecular debris that the flagship's hull filters would mistake for cosmic dust. 5 seconds, Rhea whispered. Dane leaned back. You might want to shield your eyes. What? The warhead detonated. The explosion was beautiful in the way that terrible things sometimes are. The thermonuclear blast ripped through the flagship's reactor core, and for a fraction of a second, a miniature sun bloomed in the Talos belt. The shockwave peeled the flagship's hull like an orange, shearing off armor plates and venting atmosphere in white jets. Secondary explosions rippled across the superstructure as ammunition stores cooked off. The flagship broke in half. Then it broke into smaller pieces. Then those pieces broke into smaller pieces. By the time the light faded, the inevitable consequence was a debris field expanding at 3 kilometers per second. Dane counted 3 heartbeats before the comms lit up. The Krev fleet erupted in chatter, panicked, overlapping, too fast for the translator to parse cleanly. He caught fragments. Where did that come from? Did they ram us? Scan everything. Silent mode is holding, Rhea said. Her voice was steady now, the kind of steady that came from shock. They still can't see us. Good, keep it that way. The fighters broke formation. They scattered into the belt, abandoning their grid pattern, chasing sensor ghosts and each other. Dane watched one intercept lock onto a nickel-iron asteroid and waste 3 missiles on it. Another collided with debris from the flagship and went up in a brief flash of orange. The remaining dreadnoughts tightened their formation, turrets swiveling, searching for a target that wasn't there. "They're scared," Rhea said. "Terrified," Dane agreed. "Good." He glanced at her. Rhea was young, 26, fresh out of the academy with 0 combat deployments before the Nightjar. She'd signed on because she thought stealth ops meant sneaking past patrols and gathering intel. She'd learned fast. Dane had made sure of that. You didn't survive in the silent service by thinking war was clean. "We're not done," Dane said. Rhea turned. "Sir, count the dreadnoughts." She checked the display. 16, the flagship's gone. "Right, so they've still got 16 ships and we've got 0 warheads left. So what's the plan?" Dane pulled up a star chart. The Talos system had 3 jump points, one leading back to human space, one leading deeper into Krev territory, and one leading to a dead system called Veil's Edge. The 3rd jump point was old, unstable, and marked with about 15 different warnings in the navigation database. Dane had used it twice. Both times had been interesting. "We're going to make them chase us," Dane said. "Where?" "Veil's Edge." Rhea paled. "That jump point's collapsing. The gravitational shear is manageable. For us maybe, for a dreadnought." "Exactly." Rhea stared at him. Then she laughed, a short, sharp sound that was half disbelief and half something darker. "You're going to lead them into a meat grinder. I prefer strategic repositioning." "You're insane." "Probably." Dane tapped the helm. The Nightjar rotated again, engines still cold, and began a slow drift toward the Veil's Edge jump point. It was a 3-hour burn at silent speed, which gave the Krev plenty of time to realize they were being played. Dane counted on it. The Dominion didn't do subtle. They'd see the Nightjar's faint drive signature, assuming they looked hard enough, and they'd follow. Pride demanded it. Revenge demanded it. Doctrine demanded it. "Sir," Rhea said, "they're moving." "All of them?" 14. 2 stayed behind to secure the debris field. "Close enough." The Krev dreadnoughts accelerated. They weren't built for speed, but they were built for overwhelming force, and right now, force meant chasing down the ghost ship that had just atomized their flagship. Dane watched them close the gap. 5 AU, 4, 3. The fighters had given up searching the belt and fallen back to escort formation. The Krev admiral, whoever they were, was pulling their forces together, consolidating, preparing for a decisive strike. It was textbook. It was predictable. It was exactly what Dane wanted. 2 hours to jump point, Rhea said. Noted. "We're cutting this really close. That's the idea." Dane finished a second cup of coffee. It was still cold. He made a mental note to fix the heating element. The Nightjar drifted through the black, engines whispering, sensors passive, a shadow slipping through the cracks of reality. Behind them, the Krev fleet burned hard, closing the gap, hungry for revenge. Ahead, the jump point waited, a hungry maw of twisted spacetime that promised either escape or annihilation. Dane cracked his knuckles. "Let's see how badly they want us." The Veil's Edge jump point looked like a wound in space. It was a gravitational anomaly, a pocket of compressed spacetime left over from a stellar collision 3 million years ago. The physics were ugly. The math was worse. Most ships avoided it. The ones that didn't usually ended up as smears of exotic particles scattered across the local light cone. Dane had studied the jump point for 2 years before his first transit. He'd mapped the tidal forces, calculated the shear vectors, and plotted a course that threaded the needle between survivable and instantaneous disintegration. The margin of error was less than 3%. He'd made it through twice. He was aiming for 3. 1 hour to jump point, Rhea said. Krev fleet is closing, distance 12,000 clicks and dropping, right on schedule. They're not slowing down. Good, sir, if they follow us through, they won't make it. Rhea turned. How do you know? Because I did the math. A dreadnought that size with their shield configuration and drive output will hit the tidal shear and tear apart before they're halfway through. We're small, fast, and our hull's designed to flex. Theirs isn't. And if you're wrong, then we all die horribly and I'll apologize. Rhea barked a laugh. You're terrible at comfort. I'm excellent at survival. The Nightjar drifted closer to the jump point. The sensors started screaming warnings: gravitational stress, tidal shear, unstable spacetime topology. Dane ignored them. He'd heard it all before. The trick was knowing which warnings mattered and which were just the universe complaining about being bent into uncomfortable shapes. 30 minutes, Rhea said. Krev fleet is launching missiles. How many? All of them. Dane pulled up the tactical display. A cloud of missiles erupted from the Dreadnoughts, over 200 warheads spread across a three-dimensional cone. They were faster than the Dreadnoughts, sleeker, with adaptive guidance systems that could track a mosquito through a hurricane. They'd catch the Nightjar in 10 minutes, maybe less. Can we evade? Rhea asked. No, can we shoot them down? We don't have point defense. So what do we do? Dane smiled. We let them chase us into the jump point. Rhea's eyes went wide. They'll detonate in the sheer field. Yep. That's going to destabilize the entire transit corridor. Probably. We could die. We could, but we probably won't. Dane adjusted the helm. The Nightjar accelerated, her engines finally waking up, cold burn transitioning to a full sprint. The adaptive plating shimmered as speed bled off some of the stealth advantages, but it didn't matter anymore. The Krev knew where they were. The chase was on. Dane threaded the ship through the edge of the tidal zone, riding the gravitational gradient like a surfer on a collapsing wave. The missiles followed. They were fast, they were precise, they were also very, very doomed. 15 seconds to jump threshold, Rhea said. Hold on. The Nightjar hit the event horizon. Space twisted. The sensors went haywire. The hull groaned as tidal forces pulled in 3 directions at once. Dane's stomach lurched, his vision blurred. Then the ship punched through and everything snapped back into focus. Behind them, the missiles crossed the threshold. The tidal shear caught them like a fist. Warheads detonated prematurely as internal guidance systems failed. The explosions cascaded, a chain reaction of light and force that ripped through the jump corridor. The shockwave destabilized the gravitational field, twisting it into a spiral of angry spacetime. The Nightjar rode the edge of the wave, engines screaming, hull flexing, barely holding together. Dane's hands were white on the controls. Rhea was praying in a language he didn't recognize. Then they were through. The Nightjar tumbled into normal space. The sensors blinked. The alarms shut off. Dane exhaled. He looked at Rhea. She was pale, shaking, staring at the viewport like she'd just seen God and God had flipped her off. We're alive, she whispered. Seems that way. And the Krev, Dane pulled up the rear sensors. The jump point was collapsing, the tidal shear spiraling inward, consuming itself. On the other side, the Krev Dreadnoughts were trying to break. They were too close, too fast, too committed. The first Dreadnought hit the event horizon and began to stretch. Hull plates peeled off like old paint. The second Dreadnought tried to reverse thrust and collided with the third. Both exploded, the rest scattered, breaking formation, desperate to avoid the gravitational maw that was eating their fleet. 4 made it out. 10 didn't. Dane watched the debris field expand. He felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not guilt, just a quiet, cold certainty that he'd done what needed to be done. Plot a course home, he said. Rhea nodded. Her hands were still shaking, but she worked the console with steady precision. Course laid in. ETA to Proxima Station, 48 hours. Good, I'll be in my quarters. Wake me if anything explodes. Sir? Dane paused at the hatch. What? Why'd you join the silent service? Dane thought about it, about the colonies, about Hadar IV, about the things he'd seen and the things he'd done and the things he'd do again if he had to. Because sometimes, he said, the only way to stop the monsters is to become a ghost. He left the bridge. Rhea sat alone, staring at the viewport, at the stars, at the silence. 2 weeks later, the Krev Dominion issued a formal statement. The loss of the flagship inevitable consequence was attributed to a catastrophic reactor failure. The destruction of 10 Dreadnoughts near Vale's Edge was blamed on navigational error. No mention of the Nightjar, no mention of Captain Dane Carver. No mention of the ghost ship that slipped through their formation and nuked them from the inside. The silent service didn't exist on any official roster. The ships were black budget. The crews were volunteers with no records. The missions were classified above top secret, buried under so many layers of clearance that even admirals forgot they were real. Dane liked it that way. Ghosts didn't need recognition, they just needed to do the job. He sat in his quarters aboard Proxima Station, drinking coffee that was finally hot, reading the after-action report. Rhea had been promoted. The Nightjar was in dry dock for repairs. Dane had 3 weeks of leave before the next mission. He planned to spend it sleeping. A message pinged his console. It was from his mother. He opened it. Heard you broke my toy. Build a better one next time. Dane smiled. He deleted the message, finished his coffee, and closed his eyes. Outside, the stars turned. The void waited, and somewhere in the black another ghost ship prepared to hunt.